The air in the Virexian hive was thick with the pungent aroma of pheromones, a heady mixture of tension and anger that saturated the narrow, twisting tunnels. Deep in the heart of the hive, Queen Zahalat sat motionless upon her towering throne, her multifaceted eyes gleaming with barely contained fury. The massive structure of intertwined chitin and silk that encased her looked as though it had been carved from the very bones of the planet, its dark sheen glistening under the hive's bioluminescent glow. Her sleek, armored body twitched as her claws scraped against the surface of her throne. She was waiting, seething with frustration, for her connection to the Xorval hive to be established. Today's news was not what she had anticipated, and the thought of failure clawed at her insides, an affront to her rule and pride. The air grew colder, heavier, as the presence of the Xorval entered the hive, not physically, but as an overwhelming presence in her mind. It echoed through the chamber, reverberating off the walls, filling the space with an invisible weight. The voice of Xorval, a vast and disembodied collective consciousness, slithered into her mind with a hiss of frustration.
The outcome was unexpected.
Xorval's voice pulsed within her, low and resonant.
The Terrans, they resist.
Zahalat's mandibles clicked in anger. Resist! Her voice was a dangerous hiss, vibrating with fury. I was informed that this assault was carried out with overwhelming force. The Terrans should have been annihilated. Yet they survive. How? Her claws flexed against the darkened stone of her throne. The mere thought of those pitiful creatures still standing enraged her. They were nothing but vermin, soft and fragile, and yet they had survived.
They are resilient,
Xorval replied, its tone colder now, filled with a rare hint of frustration.
Their will to survive surpasses their limitations. It is infuriating.
Queen Zahalat let out a chitter of disgust, her mandibles clicking in irritation. Infuriating does not begin to describe it. Your forces were designed to overwhelm, to crush, yet they still live. The Terrans were outnumbered, outmatched, and should have been obliterated. What makes these creatures so stubborn?
They are not like the others,
Xorval answered.
Their drive, their refusal to accept death, it is unlike anything we have faced. Even when they are overwhelmed, even when there is no hope, they continue to fight. It defies logic. They are an aberration.
Zahalat's claws scratched at the armrest of her throne. An aberration that must be corrected. This defiance undermines us. If they survive, they will become a symbol of hope for others. They must be eradicated, or we will lose more than just this battle. Her eyes narrowed, burning with the intensity of her fury. Xorval forces were powerful, vast, bred for destruction. That these Terrans had not only survived, but fought back was an insult to their alliance that she could not bear.
Their defiance is unacceptable,
Xorval agreed, its words vibrating through the dark chamber.
They have shown that even the mightiest of our forces can be repelled. This cannot be allowed to continue.
Zahalat's mandibles clicked once again as she pondered the implications. The Terrans were proving to be a greater threat than anticipated, but they were not invincible. She had seen species far stronger fall before her. If they can repel even your forces, it suggests a weakness in our approach. We will crush them, but we must strike harder. They must be made an example of.
They will be eradicated,
Xorval agreed.
We will recalibrate, reassess. The next assault will be absolute. No more survival, no more resistance. They will be destroyed down to the last.
Queen Zahalat's eyes gleamed, her anger giving way to cold determination. See that it is done. We will strike them down with such force that their very existence will become a distant memory. Let them bleed. Let them suffer. When they fall, the galaxy will know the futility of opposing us. With that, the connection between them faded, leaving Queen Zahalath alone in her chamber, seething with anger. The soft glow of the hive's bioluminescence flickered, as if mirroring her mood. Her claws tapped rhythmically against the throne, her mind already envisioning the final destruction of the Terrans. But even as she envisioned her victory, she couldn't shake the feeling that the Terrans would be harder to kill than she originally thought. Earlier the day prior, on a lone outpost near the edge of the system, Outpost Echo was the kind of posting that most Terrans dreaded, a small, lonely base on a barren moon, far removed from the comforts of home. Orbiting a gas giant in a distant, forgotten corner of the galaxy, the outpost's sole purpose was to monitor a wormhole that until now had seemed more a relic of the past than a strategic asset. The crew stationed there was minimal, maybe 150, a skeleton crew compared to most outposts, tasked with maintaining equipment that hardly ever saw use, in a place where the silence of space was only interrupted by the hum of machinery. The moon itself was a desolate wasteland. Aside from the barely breathable atmosphere, its surface was pockmarked by craters and covered in a fine gray dust that clung to everything. The sky, perpetually dark, save for the faint glow of the distant gas giant, offered no solace. Even the stars seemed muted here, as if this place was a forgotten backwater of the universe, a place where light and hope came to die. Inside the outpost, the atmosphere was no less grim. The corridors, illuminated by dim, flickering lights, seemed to stretch endlessly into the shadows. The air was cold, dry, and carried the faint, familiar taste of French fries, common on Terran outposts. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the aging structure and the low, steady pulse of the base's system. It was the kind of silence that got into a person's head, gnawing at their sanity bit by bit. Captain Elena Shaw leaned against the reinforced glass of the observation deck, staring out at the bleak landscape beyond. She was a woman of few words, her face lined with the marks of a soldier who had seen too much. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, took in the emptiness with a sort of resigned acceptance. This place was hell, but it was her hell, and she'd be damned if she'd let it get the better of her. She smirked to herself, a dry, humorless grin. "At least it's quiet," she muttered under her breath, though she knew better than to tempt fate. Shaw had survived too many battles to believe in luck or peace. She was pragmatic, hardened by years of service, and she knew that quiet could be just as dangerous as noise. If something went wrong out here, no one was coming to save them. "Captain," a voice crackled over the intercom, dragging her from her thoughts. "This is Tate. We've got a few issues in the armory. Nothing major, just the usual bullshit. Want me to handle it?" Shaw sighed and pushed off the glass, straightening her uniform. Sergeant Marcus Tate was as reliable as they came, a battle-hardened Marine who had been with her through thick and thin. He was a cynic, the kind of man who had seen too much and trusted too little, but he always got the job done. He had a rare quality in a soldier. He knew how to stay alive, even when the odds were stacked against him. "Yeah, take care of it, Tate. And while you're at it, remind the new recruits that this isn't a damn vacation. I want everyone on their toes." "Will do, Captain. And hey, for the record, if anyone asks, tell them this is the galaxy's best-kept secret. Free dust, complimentary terror, and all the solitude you can handle," Tate replied, his voice laced with dark humor. Shaw chuckled despite herself. "Sounds like a 5-star review, Sergeant. I'll make sure the brass knows we're enjoying ourselves." Down in the bowels of the outpost, Private Jess Harper was doing her best not to fuck up and make herself look like a fool. She was young, maybe too young for this kind of assignment, but she was determined to prove herself. The outpost was a far cry from the training simulations she'd excelled at. Here, the stakes were real, and the looming fear of the unknown hung over her like a shroud. Harper checked her equipment for the third time, hands trembling slightly. She was scared, though she'd never admit it. The quiet, the isolation, the sheer emptiness of this place. It was all so much more than she had expected, but she pushed those thoughts aside, steeling herself for whatever might come. She had to be ready. "Relax, kid." Tate's voice startled her as he entered the room. If you keep checking that rifle, you'll wear it out before you even fire a shot. Harper gave a nervous laugh, trying to mask her anxiety.
Just making sure it's ready, Sergeant.
Good, Tate said, his tone softening slightly. Stay sharp, but don't let this place get to you. It's designed to mess with your head. Harper nodded, appreciating the advice, but still feeling the weight of the moon's desolation pressing down on her. She wasn't sure if it was the silence, the isolation, or the knowledge that they were so far from help that was the worst, but she knew she couldn't let it show. Meanwhile, in the engineering bay, Lieutenant Ravi Patel was buried in his work. Patel was the kind of man who found comfort in routine, in the whir of machinery and the glow of computer screens. He wasn't a fighter, never had been, but he was damn good at what he did. He had to be, out here. If something broke, it was his job to fix it. And out here, everything was old and prone to breaking. Damn it! Patel cursed under his breath as a shower of sparks erupted from a console. He jumped back, narrowly avoiding being singed. Piece of junk. He wasn't one for bravado or heroics. His job was to keep the outpost running, to make sure the power flowed, the air circulated, and the sensors stayed online. But deep down, he knew that if something really went wrong, if they were attacked, no amount of engineering expertise would save them. And that was the reality of Outpost Echo, a small crew, isolated on a dead rock, surrounded by the cold, indifferent void of space. Each member knew, in the back of their mind, that they were on their own. There would be no cavalry, no rescue mission if things went south, but as long as they had breath in their lungs, they would do their duty. Shaw, standing alone in the observation deck, allowed herself a moment of reflection. This place, this hellish moon, was the kind of posting that broke people. But not her, not her crew. They were too damn stubborn to let it. Outpost Echo was never meant to be on the front lines, but as the crew huddled around the central console, it became clear that their luck had finally run out. Captain, you need to see this. Lieutenant Patel's voice was tight with fear as he waved Shaw over. The screen in front of him displayed a series of rapidly fluctuating readings. An enormous mass is moving toward the outpost at an alarming speed. What the hell is it? She demanded, already feeling a knot of dread forming in her stomach. Nothing good, Patel muttered, running a hand through his hair. It's organic, Captain. Whatever it is, it's alive and massive. Sorval. Tate spat the word like a curse as he leaned in to get a better look. Fucking Sorval. We're dead. Not yet, we're not, Shaw snapped, her voice cutting through the rising panic. Get everyone to their stations. I want this outpost locked down and ready for a fight. What kind of fight? Patel asked, his voice trembling. This place isn't built for... Shut up and do your job, Tate barked, his face a mask of anger and frustration. We've got maybe 5 minutes before that bastard is on top of us, and I'll be damned if I'm going down without a fight. Harper, who had been listening in from across the room, felt her heart race as she processed the news. Xorval. She had heard the stories, nightmarish tales of entire colonies being wiped out, of soldiers being torn apart by monsters that shouldn't even exist. And now, they were here, coming for them. Everyone listen up, Shaw's voice rang out over the intercom, steady despite the chaos. We're about to be hit by Xorval. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Lock and load and be ready for anything. We are Terrans, and we do not go down easy. The crew moved with a sense of urgency that bordered on desperation. Alarms blared throughout the outpost as blast doors slammed shut, sealing off vulnerable sections. Weapons were loaded and defensive positions were taken. But beneath the surface, the fear was palpable. Fuck. Harper muttered under her breath as she double-checked her rifle. Her hands shook as she fumbled with the safety, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Harper! Tate's voice snapped her out of it. He stood in front of her, his expression hard. Get your shit together. You freeze up out there, you're dead. Understand? Yes, Sergeant, she replied, swallowing her fear as best she could. Tate nodded, his gaze softening for just a moment. Stay close to me, kid. We'll get through this. Then, without warning, the sky outside darkened, As Zorval's bioship descended, it was like something out of a nightmare, a massive, grotesque creature with leathery skin stretched tight over a bulbous, pulsating body. Tendrils writhed from its sides, eyes that glowed with a sickly yellow light, its mouth vast and lined with rows of jagged teeth, dripping with mucus that sizzled where it touched the ground. "They're on us!" Patel shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "They're fucking on us!" The bioship blotted out the stars, casting the outpost into an eerie twilight as it moved in for the landing zone. The first wave of Zorval drones broke off from the main body, slithering and crawling toward the outpost with horrifying speed. These creatures were worse than anything the crew had imagined. Twisted abominations with multiple limbs, oozing pustules, and flesh that looked like it was rotting from the inside out. The air was thick with the stench of decay, a miasma that clung to everything. "Open fire!" Shaw ordered, her voice a lifeline amidst the chaos. The corridor erupted in a hail of gunfire as the Marines and point defenses unloaded their weapons into the oncoming horde. Bullets tore through the slimy, mottled flesh of the Zorval's drones, but for every creature that fell, more surged forward, undeterred by the carnage. "Fucking die already!" Tate roared, emptying his clip into a drone that had gotten too close. The creature shrieked as it was torn apart, its pustules bursting in a spray of foul-smelling goo that splattered across the walls and floor. Harper gritted her teeth as she fired, the recoil jarring her to the bone. Her shots found their mark, cutting down one drone after another. But it wasn't enough. They just kept coming, crawling over the bodies of their fallen with that same mindless hunger. "Jesus Christ! There's no end to them!" Patel yelled, his voice barely audible over the din of battle. One of the drones lunged at him, its jaws snapping inches from his face. He scrambled back, tripping over a fallen Marine, and landed hard on the ground. The creature reared up, ready to strike, but before it could, Harper shot it in the head, splattering the floor with its viscous black blood. "Get up!" she shouted, grabbing Patel by the arm and hauling him to his feet. "We're not done here yet!" The corridor was a scene of utter carnage. Blood, both red and black, coated the walls in thick, sticky layers. Bodies lay everywhere, Terran and Zorval alike, their remains twisted and broken in the most gruesome ways imaginable. The floor was slick with bile and viscera, making every step treacherous. But the crew fought on, their fear fueling their rage. They had nothing left but their determination, and they would make every Zorval bastard pay for every inch they tried to take. Shaw, still in the command center, watched the scene unfold on the monitors. Her jaw was clenched, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the console. She could see her crew being overwhelmed, their numbers dwindling with every passing second. "Damn you all," she muttered, a vicious snarl twisting her lips. "You're not taking this place. Not while I'm still breathing." The Zorval drones kept coming, relentless and unforgiving. The outpost shook as the bioship unleashed another wave of drones, the ground quaking beneath the force of their arrival. "We're getting slaughtered out here!" Tate yelled over the comms, his voice raw with fury. "Where the fuck are those reinforcements?" he said, only half joking. "There never were reinforcements, Sergeant," Shaw replied, her tone cold and hard. "It's just us." "Then we make these fuckers bleed," Tate snarled. "Every last one of them." And so they fought, a handful of Terrans against an endless tide of nightmares. Zorval pushed forward, their claws rending flesh, their poison bursting in toxic clouds. But the Terrans pushed back with everything they had. It was a slaughter, a bloodbath, a desperate last stand against an enemy that seemed hell-bent on eradicating them from existence. But for all the horror, for all the pain and blood and death, there was one thing that Zorval couldn't account for. Human stubbornness. They could tear the Terrans apart, drown them in gore, but they couldn't break their will. Not here. Not ever. Shaw watched as her crew gave everything they had, as they fell one by one in a blaze of gunfire and fury. She knew they wouldn't survive this, but if they were going down, they were taking as many of those goddamn monsters with them as they could. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Everywhere you looked, there was blood and bile, The aftermath of the initial assault leaving a sickening trail of destruction. A stench of death hung heavy in the air, mingling with the acrid smoke from malfunctioning equipment and the sickly sweet odor of the Zorval's rotting flesh. The emergency lights flickered weakly, casting long, distorted shadows across the carnage as the surviving crew members regrouped, their nerves frayed, but their resolve unbroken. Captain Elena Shaw stood in the center of the command room, her uniform splattered with blood and viscera, her eyes flicked across the monitors, taking in the grim situation. The outpost was barely holding together. Sections of the base were completely overrun, Xorval grotesque forms sweeping through like a festering wound, and the defenses that hadn't been destroyed were faltering under the relentless assault.
"We're not gonna make it, Captain,"
Sergeant Marcus Tate said, his voice gruff as he staggered into the room, wiping the blood off his face with the back of his hand. His armor was battered, his weapon covered in gore. "Not if we keep this up." Shaw turned to him, her face a mask of cold determination. "We're not dead yet, Sergeant. We still have a job to do." "And what fucking job is that?" Tate snapped back, his unusual cynicism boiling over into anger. "We're outnumbered, outgunned, and stuck in this goddamn shithole with no way out. They're going to tear us apart." "Then we make them bleed for every goddamn inch they take," Shaw replied, her voice as hard as steel. "They want this outpost? They'll have to claw it from our cold, dead hands." Tate let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "That's the plan? Go down fighting and hope the bastards choke on our bones?" Shaw stepped closer to him, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that shut him up. "That's exactly the plan, Sergeant. Now get your ass back out there and do your job." Tate stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head with a grim smile. "You're one stubborn bitch, Captain." "Fine. We'll see how many of these fuckers we can take with us." In the engineering bay, Lieutenant Ravi Patel was fighting his own battle against the outpost itself. The systems were failing, the power fluctuating wildly as he desperately tried to reroute energy to the shields and critical defenses. Sweat poured down his face as he worked, his hands trembling from a combination of fear and exhaustion. Come on, Patel muttered, cursing under his breath as he forced a stubborn console to respond. Sparks flew as he jammed a tool into an exposed panel, trying to bypass a blown circuit. "Don't you fucking die on me now!" The console beeped weakly, and the lights flickered back to life, though dimly, as if the outpost itself was on its last breath. "Backup systems are online," Patel reported over the comms, his voice shaking. "But they're not going to hold for long, Captain. We're running out of fumes here." "Keep them up as long as you can, Lieutenant." Shaw's voice crackled back. "Every second counts." Patel took a deep breath, wiping his brow with a shaky hand. "Yeah, sure. No pressure." As the battle raged on, Private Jess Harper found herself in the thick of it, her heart pounding in her chest as she fought to keep Zorval drones at bay. The creatures were everywhere, their grotesque forms slithering and crawling through the narrow corridors, bursting through walls and dropping from the ceilings. Every corner turned revealed another horror. A marine being torn apart by a drone's claws, a body crushed beneath the weight of a monstrous creature, or a corridor flooded with poisonous bile. But Harper didn't stop. She couldn't. Her rifle was an extension of her will, firing again and again, each shot finding its mark in the nightmarish creatures. The recoil jarred her arms, but she barely felt it, the adrenaline coursing through her veins numbing the pain. "Harper, behind you!" Tate's voice cut through the din, and Harper spun just in time to see a drone lunging at her, its maw gaping wide, dripping with foul-smelling saliva. She fired on instinct, the bullet ripping through the creature's head, causing it to explode in a shower of black ichor. The stench was overwhelming, and Harper gagged, her vision swimming as the bile splattered across her armor. "Keep your head on straight, kid!" Tate barked as he gunned down another drone. "They're not gonna stop, so neither can we!" Harper nodded, her throat too dry to speak, and continued firing. She could feel the exhaustion creeping in, her limbs heavy, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. But there was no time to rest, no time to think, only fight. In the command room, Shaw monitored the battle with a growing sense of dread. Zorval was relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. Every time her crew pushed them back, More came crawling over the bodies of their fallen, driven by some nightmarish will. They had to be buying time, or this was all for nothing. "Captain, they're breaching Section C." Patel's voice came over the comms, strained and frantic. "We've lost the containment fields, and they're pouring in." "Damn it," Shaw cursed, slamming her fist into the console. "Seal off that section. We can't let them spread any further." "Our people will be trapped in there with the drones," Patel protested. "Do it," Shaw snapped, "or we're all dead." Patel didn't argue further. A moment later, the section was sealed, the blast door slamming shut with a resounding clang, cutting off the crew trapped inside. Shaw stared at the monitor, watching as the Terran life signs in Section C blinked out one by one, her face a mask of cold resolve. "Captain, we're running out of ammo!" Tate's voice broke through the silence. "What the hell do you want us to do, throw rocks at them?" "Scavenge what you can find from the dead," Shaw ordered, her voice steely. "Use the Zorval's own claws against them if you have to." Tate let out a harsh laugh. "You heard the captain, boys and girls. Start picking through the corpses, because we're fresh out of options." Harper, who had been down to her last magazine, quickly swapped her empty rifle for one dropped by a fallen Marine. Her hands shook as she reloaded, but she forced herself to focus. This wasn't how she imagined her first real battle would go. But then, nothing about this nightmare was what she had expected. Xorval kept coming, wave after wave, their grotesque bodies piling up in the corridors. But still they pressed on, relentless in their assault. The Terrans were pushed back step by step, retreating deeper into the outpost as their lines broke, their numbers dwindling. But they fought on. Tate, his armor cracked and bloodied, wielded a piece of rebar like a club, smashing the skulls of any creature that got too close. "Come on, you bastards!" he roared, his voice hoarse from shouting. "I've got plenty more where that came from." Harper fought at his side, her breaths ragged, her vision blurring with exhaustion. Her mind was a haze of fear and adrenaline, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Every time a drone lunged at her, she fired, not caring about the blood that sprayed across her face or the screams of the dying all around her. She was in the fight now, and there was no way out but through. "Harper, on your left!" Tate shouted, but she was already moving, spinning to fire at the drone creeping up behind her. The creature's head exploded in a shower of ichor, and she barely had time to wipe the gore from her visor before another drone was upon her. She drove her boot into its chest, sending it sprawling, then unloaded the rest of her clip into its twitching body. The drone convulsed and died, its last breath a sickening gurgle. "Not bad, kid," Tate muttered, breathing heavily as he leaned against the wall. "Not bad at all." "Sergeant, I don't think I can," Harper began, but Tate cut her off. "You can!" he growled, moving in close. "You will, because we—" He paused, smacking a Zorval drone. "Are not done yet." Finishing his sentence, he brought his makeshift weapon down with a finishing blow. The battle was a blur of blood and violence, a desperate struggle for survival against an enemy that knew no mercy. The corridors of Outpost Echo became a killing ground, the walls slick with blood and bile, the floor littered with the broken bodies of Marines and monsters alike. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Xorval began to falter. Their numbers thinned, their assault slowed. The Terrans, bloodied and exhausted, stood their ground, refusing to give an inch. "We've got them!" Tate shouted, a voice raw with triumph. "They're fucking breaking!" But Shaw knew better than to celebrate too soon. "Stay sharp," she warned. "They're not done yet." And they weren't. With a final, desperate surge, Xorval threw everything they had left at the outpost. The bioship, hovering above like a dark, twisted wraith, unleashed one last wave of drones, the creatures hurtling down like a torrent of nightmares, desperate suicide bombers in attempt to level the structure. The impact was devastating. The outpost shook, the walls shuddering with force, and the floor threatening to crack open. Harper was thrown off her feet, her head slamming into the wall as she fell. The world spun, her vision going black, and for a moment, she thought it was over. But it wasn't. She forced herself up, every muscle screaming in protest, her vision swimming as she staggered to her feet. The corridor was a hellscape. The walls caved in, the floor littered with the dead and dying. But through the smoke and dust, she saw Tate still standing, covered in blood, but grinning like a madman. "We're still here, kid!" he shouted, his voice filled with manic energy. "We're still fucking here!" And that was the truth. They were still standing, still fighting, still refusing to die. The Xorval had thrown everything they had at them, but the Terrans were too stubborn, too angry, and too damn determined to give up. As the last of the drones fell, the silence that followed was deafening. Shaw watched the monitors, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her hands shaking as the adrenaline began to wear off.
"We did it."
Patel's voice broke through the silence, weak but filled with relief.
"Holy shit. We actually did it."
"Don't start celebrating just yet," Shaw replied, though her voice was softer now, the edge of command slipping away. "We've still got a lot of work to do." "Yeah?" Tate's voice crackled over the comms, tired but defiant. "But we're still here, Captain." And that was enough. The Galactic Council chamber, vast and imposing, was unusually quiet. The events at Outpost Echo had forced an emergency session, and all three council species, the Terrans, the Saranai, and the Greys, had gathered to discuss what had transpired. In the center of the chamber, a massive holographic display replayed the brutal incursion on the barely habitable moon, Xorval's bioship descending like a monstrous leviathan, the Terrans' desperate last stand, and the corridors of Outpost Echo awash in blood and bile. All of it played out in stark, violent detail. As the final scenes of carnage faded from view, a heavy silence fell over the chamber. The Saranai representative, a towering figure with smooth, scaled skin that transitioned into feather-like structures on their limbs and head, stepped forward. Their vibrant plumage, normally a display of calm blues and greens, had darkened, a subtle sign of deep concern. High-feathered sage Kavar's voice was slow and deliberate, each word carrying the weight of centuries of contemplation.
"Xorval has never been repelled like this. Not once in our history has their force been met with such resilience."
The Grey representative, a small, slender figure with large, expressionless eyes, simply nodded. Galactic Counselor 3's voice, when it came, was soft and measured, devoid of the usual aloof detachment that the Greys were known for.
"Xorval has always considered us insignificant. Their victories have been totaled, their strength unmatched, and yet the Terrans, they did not abandon their post."
The Terran representative, a seasoned diplomat named Evelyn Grant, leaned forward, her expression calm but resolute. Years of navigating interstellar politics had honed her instincts, but even she couldn't hide the gravity of the situation.
"We've always been underestimated,"
she said, her voice firm and steady.
"By our enemies, by our allies, sometimes even by ourselves. But that's the thing about humans. We don't know how to quit. We're too damn stubborn to die quietly."
Kavar inclined their heads slightly, their feathers shifting in a display that might have indicated agreement or contemplation.
"This stubbornness, it is both a strength and a danger. Xorval will not take this lightly. They will return, and they will do so with greater force."
Galactic Counselor 3's large black eyes blinked slowly, the only visible sign of any emotion.
"They will seek to annihilate what they perceive as a threat. The Terrans have shown them that they can bleed. This changes the balance of power in many ways we cannot yet foresee."
Grant nodded, her expression unyielding.
"We know what's coming. The Virexians and Xorval have always wanted to break us, to prove that the Galactic Council is weak, but we've shown them that we won't go down without a fight."
There was a pause as the implications of her words settled in. The Saranai, ancient and deliberate, were often seen as the Council's wisdom. The Greys, with their cold logic, represented its intellect. But the Terrans, humans, were its fire, its unyielding will to survive against all odds. Kavar finally spoke again, their voice thoughtful and deep.
"The question now is not whether we can survive the next assault, but whether we can afford to simply survive. As I said, Xorval and the Virexians will come in greater numbers, with greater ferocity. We must be prepared to take the fight to them."
Galactic Counselor 3's gaze shifted to Grant.
"This battle has shown the Terrans are capable of withstanding the worst that Xorval can throw at them. But can you lead the counterstrike? Can humanity bear the weight of what comes next?
Grant's eyes hardened, her resolve clear.
We don't have a choice. If we're going to survive, if the Galactic Council is going to survive, we have to show them that we are not just stubborn, we're relentless. We'll take the fight to the Zorval and the Virexians, and we'll make them regret ever thinking they could break us.
With that, the meeting was adjourned, and the representatives dispersed, each returning to their respective worlds to prepare for the coming storm. The Galactic Council had been tested, and it had not broken. Now it was time to fight back.